Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. I see more and more people are joining. A few are still in the waiting room, but I suggest I kick off already. And like to welcome you all to this session about unlocking the human element, integrating patient insights and experiences into precision medicine value assessment. My name is Liedewij Vats. I work for the Synergist. I'm a program director for one of the programs from testing to targeted treatments. And I'm one of your moderators of today. For those of you who are new to the Patient Engagement Open Forum session, this is a virtual and impersonal sessions that we organize together with UPATI and EPF. And it's really bringing the community, the stakeholders together towards stronger patient engagement. And we approach this really from a holistic perspective, integrating all the stakeholders' views and co-creating solutions towards reducing fragmentation and improving outcomes for patients. We have for you translations available today. So for those who wish to listen to this in another language, you can find a little pop-up in your chat or in your screen, which comes from Wordy. If you open that, then the translations will appear in a separate chat. At any time, if you would like to go back to the group chat, you can click on the icon below in the chat box and you come back to the overall group chat. And if you want to go back to the translations, you go to the app icon. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to post those in the chat. My team is here to help with any technical issues. For any of you, if you want to pose a question for the panelists or to discuss overall, you can use the Q&A icon that is also below in your Zoom window. And then we will try to bring those to the panelists, or we will try to answer questions into the chat box. With that, I have a last housekeeping meeting on the next slide. We have muted microphones, but again, we have the Q&A option, the chat for you to share any comments. We really would like to have this as an engaging and inspiring session, so don't hesitate to share any questions and thoughts you may have. This session will also be recorded, and we will share the recording afterwards via email, as well as on the signups position of patient engagement page. So let's have an interesting session. And with that, I will introduce the other panel speakers and moderators. This session was co-organized also by FPA, and I'm very glad to have Ona here from FPA, who will shortly introduce the agenda and objectives. And I'm also very pleased to have Neil Beertenson here today from HGAI, as well as PFMD board member, who brings a ton of expertise with HTA, patient engagement, and patient experience data. And he will be setting the scene and your moderator for the panel discussion of today. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to you, Ona, to get to know the room and to introduce the agenda.
Thank you, Liedewij, and a warm welcome for me as well to everyone. It's so good to see so many of you on this call, and hopefully we're 88 now. We'll get to 100 by the time we finish with the introductions. Just to break the ice a bit, because it's such an interesting but complex topic. If you could put in the chat a number that best corresponds to how you feel about the state of value assessment today. Let's not spend too much time on it, but just to give us a bit of a perspective, and hopefully we'll take you to a cool and comfortable number by the end of this session. So I already see lots of 3. Okay, we're starting on a good note already. Good. 3s. Okay, the numbers are coming in, and now we get a bit more variety. It's great to see the engagement, and already I can see we're getting close to 100 participants with more people joining us. Excellent. Okay, 6 as well. So we have 3s and 6 and a bit in between. As we're letting the numbers gather, maybe I propose that we take stock a bit now and at the end, because clearly there's a lot of interest in this topic, and hopefully by the end we'll all be like number 3, very, very chilled about and comfortable with the topic. So as we go on to the next slide, we'll still have a bit of a Zoom poll because we're not only interested in your spirit animal, but also in the different perspectives that you're bringing to the webinar today. So I believe that colleagues are helping us with the Zoom poll, and maybe just to introduce it, if you could indicate whether you represent the patient community, industry, academia, regulators, HTA, or any other categories that bring you today. Just so we have an idea, and that will help both the panelists and everyone else who's made the session possible today to make the best experience for you. So I already seen the chat and I've answered to the poll. I will have colleagues give me a signal once we've have a sizable number of responses and a bit of an indication of where we are. I saw patient perspectives quite a lot, which is good to know. We're letting those giving this a bit of time because it's important to make sure that we know all who we are in the room. And I'll look at Matt and Isha for a sign. Good to know. 70% of you responded. Excellent. And I believe we have a good variety and diversity of perspectives, which will make for an enriching discussion as we proceed both with the panel and with the workshops. Which actually brings me to the agenda for today, which you will see onto the next slide. We've set the scene nicely. Before I will hand it shortly to Neil, and then we will start with an interesting panel discussion on how patient insights and experiences can support more user and patient-centric approaches in HTA. Then we'll go into a co-creation workshop in groups because we really want to identify those opportunities to accelerate patient experience data in HTA, to suggest the kind of data that most align with HTA considerations, and how patient experience data can inform those precision medicine related HTA submissions. And then we'll have a plenary wrap up and next steps, and Neil and Lee Devay will be here to guide you through the process. So that's the agenda, and then we will break that down into today's objectives, because clearly we're seeing that patient engagement has been gaining a lot of pace in the past years in medicines and medical technology development. And we're seeing more regulatory and HTA bodies more interested in understanding patient experiences and preferences in their assessments. But there is, as we all know, huge variability in how that is happening, and whether HTA bodies value or incorporate patient preferences and experiences in their evaluations. So that brings us to today's objectives. We're keen to understand how we can accelerate and learn how patient experience data can support HTA decisions, and what the role of each of the stakeholder groups is in all that. And we have, as I said, a good variety today, a diversity of stakeholders. Explore then what kind of data makes meaningful patient experience data of new for HTA of new innovative therapies, and to discuss ways to support HTA bodies with data that can be used in their decision-making process. So rich agenda and relevant objectives with, as anticipated, over 100 people having joined us by the end of the introduction, which is my pleasure now to pass it on to Neil for his excellent expertise in this field. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's great to see so many people who are really fascinated and interested and passionate about this subject. I'm going to go through some slides really quickly. These are just to make sure that those of you that haven't been involved in HTA or precision medicine or patient experience data, that we're all on the same page. So we'll look at some of the main themes here. So we'll talk about what is health technology assessment, just to make sure that we're all clear what we're talking about, patient experience data and precision medicine. If you go on to the next slide, please. So when we think about HTA, it's around value assessment. And so this is making sure that there's a process and it's a multidisciplinary process to determine the value of a health technology, whether that be a precision medicine or more common medicines. And it does that at different points in its life cycle. And its purpose is really to inform if a health technology should be used within a healthcare system, usually used within a public healthcare system. If it should be used, how best should we use it? When should we use it? Under what circumstances? And a really important part of that question is which patients will benefit most from this new technology. The challenge is that every country has a slightly different system for doing this. And so there's a lot of heterogeneity in the HTA world that we have to navigate. And that creates some challenges, and we'll talk about those later. And I should also say here, as while I'm presenting, if you've got any questions, do pop them in the chat. We'll try to cover some of them during our panel discussion. And we'll also be able to cover more during the work group sessions in the second half of this session. If you go on to the next slide. So that was HTA. What about patient experience data? It's data that's collected that really captures patients' experiences, their perspectives, their needs, and their priorities related to their health, their disease and their symptoms that they experience, their experience of healthcare, and what it is that actually happens to them on a daily basis as they live with a condition, as they get treated for that condition, and their experience with current medicines, current ways of managing their condition. But a really important part of patient experience data is what are the important factors to patients? And so a key question is, why is one thing more important to focus on when you're doing a HTA than another thing? What outcomes do you focus on within a health technology assessment? And that relative importance of different factors is something that patient experience data can really help us illuminate. If you go on to the next slide, please. And what about precision medicine? What are we talking about there? And sometimes it's talking about targeted medicines or targeted treatments. But it's this world where we're starting to realize, and we have the science to back this up, that it's not one particular medicine that can treat everybody with that condition. But increasingly, we're looking to say, how can we develop medicines that are targeted to the person itself? Could be the genetic profile of the person or the genetic profile of the condition that they have. And this is all about having the right medicine for the right patient at the right time, compared to 10 years ago, where we tended to have medicines that were designed for the whole patient population with that condition. So really targeted. I'm going very quickly through this, but I want to ensure that we really have time for the panel discussion and our work together. These are the kinds of questions that come up from health technology assessment bodies when they're looking for insights and input from the patient community. They want clarity on how the condition affects day-to-day life of people living with it. And they want to understand how well or how badly current medicines or current ways of managing that condition are from the patient perspective. They want to know if the patients have been able to talk to anybody who's tried the new medicine or the new medical device, and really want to understand what was that like? What was that experience of the new thing compared to the current things that we have available already? They want some insights on how this new medicine would be expected to improve patients' quality of life and their experience of care. And some HTA bodies go further than that and say, what about families and caregivers? How will this potentially affect their lives and their well-being too? And a really important question that's asked that people get a bit scared of, but it's an important question to answer, is any disadvantages with a new medicine? We know that no medicine is 100% perfect. And so they want the patient view of the relative importance of the benefits versus the risks in a similar way that we have with the regulatory world. So that's a really important question as well. And if we go on to the next slide. But, and this is where it gets difficult for precision medicine, there are lots of reasons why some of these things are more difficult to answer in the current HTA process for precision medicines. Because it's precision medicines, you tend to have a much smaller patient population that a medicine has been studied in. And so that leads to questions about how robust is the data that supports this new medicine. We lack really techniques and really rigorous techniques in a systematic way of thinking about real world evidence to support that clinical data. A really, really important difference depends on country to country is that often with precision medicine, you have a companion diagnostic that checks the genetic profile, that makes sure that you've got the right biomarkers to receive a particular medicine. And sometimes the diagnostic is assessed separately from the medicine itself. And that can create a big disconnect when thinking about how we look at the value of precision medicines, which are tied to the value of the diagnostics. And I think scientifically, sometimes there's a really clear link between the target of a precision medicine and the outcomes of a disease. But sometimes that's a little bit less clear. There is science to support that having this target for this particular medicine will work better. But there's not always a clear link in the science to link the two together. And that can create some questions in HTA about the sort of benefits the healthcare system can expect from a precision medicine. And of course, I touched on this before, we have challenges in the fact that the HTA landscape is itself complex. Each country has different systems, different requirements. Not all involve patients. Some involve patients a lot, some a little bit, but some not at all still. And although we have, you've probably heard about this, the European HTA regulation, and that will harmonize an element, hopefully, of HTA, decisions and the full process will still happen nationally. So the recommendation from HTA bodies will still happen in each country with different processes governing those systems. So the complexity is still going to be with us for quite some time more. And so when we think about that, what could the solutions be? Well, one of the solutions, and those of you that have attended previous PEOFs on this subject will know that patient engagement is certainly something that we see as a key solution to bringing things together. And we don't just mean patient engagement in creating patient experience data, but also contextualizing it as well. We need to ensure that there's patient participation in the HTA decision-making or recommendation-making process. And that patients are there to give context, not just to the patient experience data, but all of the data that is considered within a HTA process. And yes, we need to make sure that patient experience data is really focused on what matters to patients. So patients need to be involved in the design and the creation of patient experience data so it's really fit for purpose. And if we go on one more slide, some examples of those two sides of a coin, if you like. On one side, you've got patient participation in the process. And one of the examples of that is the PACE program, which is run in Scotland by the Scottish HTA body. And really what we've seen with the PACE program, which really allows testimony and discussion from the patient community, is proper patient involvement, is that we see that it does lead to better recommendations coming from the HTA body in Scotland. And we can see there's examples, especially in countries like Germany, that really focus and have done for many years on patient experience data, patient-reported outcomes, that they're finding that kind of data really useful to highlight when there might be particular added value to patients that's not just in terms of the clinical efficacy, but maybe in other dimensions of how it affects patients' daily lives. And we certainly had examples within Germany where the assessment has shifted based on understanding patient experience data, patient-reported outcomes. We move on to another potential solution around that is to really think about how do we develop the tools in order to focus our patient experience data and patient engagement to answering the questions that matter to patients, but are also relevant for health technology assessment. And that's where tools such as the global PED navigators shown here can really help. They really help break down what is most important to patients, how you use different approaches and methods in order to capture that in patient experience data. When you use that information, that evidence with other stakeholders, and who are those stakeholders you need to be reaching with that kind of evidence. So it breaks it down really clearly for you. You move on to the next slide. There's another element here which we often don't touch upon, but it's really important. And this is the second set of solutions here, which is how we quantify value. What dimensions do we use when we think about what is valuable? And this is work that has been proposed by an ISPOR task force. And you can see these sort of green dots at the top right, at the top of this circle here. They're the sort of common things that HTA bodies look at. They look at more than this, but they often focus on quality of life, net costs, of course, the clinical benefit that a treatment might have over what's there already. Some will look at productivity. Some, as I've said already, will look at family and caregivers. But there's a whole range of other kinds of dimensions of value that are sometimes covered, but in a sort of ad hoc way, not in a systematic way. Value of hope, the severity of the disease, the value of knowing, which is really important in terms of biomarkers, the value of knowing what your biomarker is, the value of knowing what your genetic predisposition is so that you can take decisions and along with your healthcare providers in order to make the best choice for you as an individual. They're often not discussed in detail or considered in detail within HTA. And you can see that on the next slide. And so on the next slide, you will see some research was done by the FT3 group, who really looked at those kinds of additional values and sense checked how are they currently considered within HTA. And as an example, they picked 4 different HTA bodies to say, okay, which of these sort of values are looked at? And you can see that patient preference experience in the middle of this table on the left, there's ticks along the way from there, which is fantastic news that we're seeing HTA bodies think about that preference and experience. But we can also see a lot of X's, a lot of crosses on this table as well, which is showing us that there's a lot of areas that could still be explored when we're thinking about what is value to HTAs. And so there'll be links that can be shared with you that will really help you see more details from this report, for example. I'm going to pause. That was really quick, and I apologize for being so quick, but really wanted to get to the panel discussion there. If you've got any questions about what you've seen so far, note them down. We can cover some of them in the panel. We can cover some of them later when we're in our working groups. But right now, I'd just like to switch gears and think about our panel discussion. So if we can go to the next slide, please, and the next one, please. I'd like to introduce our panel. So we have Valentina Stramiello from the European Patients Forum. We have Barry Stein from Colorectal Cancer Canada, Zoltan Carlo from Semmelweis University, and Ansgar Hebborn from Roche. And so welcome to my panel members. And while everybody else is thinking about questions they want to maybe ask our panel, I'm going to open with a question from me. And I want to ask each of you this same question, which is, when you think about the last few years, what for you has been the most notable change that you've seen or observed regarding the use of patient experience data in HTA? And Valentina, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you everyone for joining this interesting session. I think from a patient perspective, what I have noticed is the interest in the patient community in patient experience data, because patients and patient organizations start to see the value of this tool to inform their advocacy effort, because this would allow them to come with an evidence-based advocacy, which of course can be much more impactful than just bringing anecdotal stories or testimonials.
So it's thinking more broadly around not just into HTA, but thinking more about the whole access policy arena and
Indeed.
advocating.
Exactly.
That's really clear. And what about you, Zoltan? What have you seen or what have you recognized over the last few years?
What I see is that actually more and more decision makers are convinced that without such data, we underestimate the true value of new technologies, which is fantastic news. But there is a negative side of this enthusiasm, because many of them actually has a different interpretation about this type of data. They go into different direction. And if we look at the drug development, actually pharma companies cannot serve 200 different expectations with scientific evidence. So there is a need for harmonization of this process, because without it, we have a very impactful and positive movement. But if we go to 100 different directions, then we create a chaos. So standardization is needed, working together is needed, because this is just the right moment to decide where to go and how to do it, how to aggregate this information with the traditional value criteria. So we need to act together. This is my most important takeaway message.
And so that's going to involve a lot of collaboration, isn't it? Because between HTAs, but between all of the stakeholders, think, what can we measure? How does this pull together to make a standard? And how do we promote that standard to others? So we can think about that as we go through this further. Ansgar, I will go to you next. What have you noticed lately?
Thanks, Neil. I think for me, still the most remarkable change in this field, and I'm with the industry in the field of outcomes research for more than 25 years. So the most remarkable thing is the articulated strong interest in this kind of data, and patient-reported outcomes, a specific part of this, in Germany, in the German AMNOG process, and specifically here in the appraisal step. Germany is the largest market for industry in Europe, and this is an important element here. I think related to this, it's also, of course, the recognition of the relevance of this data in the, or most likely, in the upcoming EU HTA joint clinical assessments, which also have to serve the German, but also the other processes. So this data is in the proposed guidance documents of UNETA 21, it's reflected there, but it's also reflected, and this is another new development in a better understanding of the context of disease, patients and caregivers, where this is also explicitly mentioned in templates of UNETA 21, which may also then guide the engagement in the EU HTA environment in 2025.
So maybe there's hope for us there that if this process goes well, the EU HTA regulation, and somehow then is sort of the snowball that goes down a mountain and collects more snow, and more people agree with a standard way of doing this, that might be a route. Let's keep our finger. Yeah, sorry.
Also raise the standard. I think this is the other challenge that we see. It raises the standard for the acceptability of this kind of evidence, and certainly something we need to engage on.
Fantastic. Thank you. Barry, what have you noticed?
So, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to be here today, and it's so nice to see so many familiar names and faces. I think that, one of the things that we could really relate to is the fact that there's been an explosion of new precision medicines targeting smaller and smaller subpopulations. And from an HTA point of view, this is creating great uncertainty in their decision-making process because very often they're not seeing phase 3 trials. So the importance of really understanding the patient perspective, the real world data from that experience with their disease, number one, of course, and with the existing treatments, and what new benefits and new added value that some of the new treatments bring is what I have seen, first of all, to be the cause for the growth in wanting to have more patient experience data. And what we've seen in addition to that is that the HTA bodies are calling out for it, industry is calling out for it, and of course patient groups want to provide that type of information to inform HTA and others. And we have to get involved, and I think this is probably the most salient point of change, and we haven't actually got there yet, but it's where we're heading. And that is the need to be engaged at the very earliest of stages in collection of the data. That means from the ideation of a clinical trial, participation, recruitment, retention, picking up those patient preferences throughout the trial, and coming back to HTA with that real world evidence from the patient perspective. So we, as a consequence of that, what we're also seeing is these large collaboration agreements between the HTA bodies. And you're right on when we start to talk about the European 25 in 2025 EU-NET HTA, I guess it's called. And I think that that's going to affect us all over the world because those collaborations on patient experience data will be necessary and shared not only in Europe but throughout the world.
That's really. It's really pulling everything together, Barry. I'm glad you said that because it's not just what's happening in Europe, but there's what's happening globally and how those things interact. But what you said at the beginning of your answer as well, that we need the patient engagement flowing through this from the very beginning of development, not just informing clinical trial design, but also being partners in patient experience data generation from the very beginning. We have a question that I want to pose to you, which came in during the presentation. It was about those different values that ISPOR have been proposing, and saying, there's a question from Ursula saying, how do you think HTAs would measure value from this wider set of criteria? And I might pose this first to you, Zoltan. It might be something you've been thinking about, how you bring in more dimensions of value and how you actually quantify those and measure those.
Absolutely. And as I said, I think it was you who said ad hoc processes, and it's good that we consider this, but there are three problems with the ad hoc process. First is that different HTA bodies can look at it differently. And even if they say they took this into account, but maybe not, because there is no evidence. So especially if we are talking about deliberative process, it's not as standardized as other elements, like about how much is the quality gain or how much is the incremental cost. And the third one is how we aggregate these criteria with other criteria. So there are lots of uncertainties related to the use of these measures. The good news, as I said, is there is a good intention now from everyone. But I argue again and again that standardization is needed, and instead of the ad hoc process, we need to have a more standardized approach to this.
Yeah, so it's bringing those standards together. But I'm really pleased that you're talking now about it's not all bad, that we do start to see at least there's a willingness there and an understanding there. And I think that's a great base to be right now. And we just need to work out how to make the next steps happen. I'm going to ask a question now to Barry. And I really want to think about targeted therapies here, Barry. And so when you think about a targeted therapy, what role do you see in particular that patient experience data can play in illuminating the value of targeted therapies?
Well, I think we have to start at the very beginning. And when we talk about targeted therapies, we have to understand who it applies to. In order to understand who it applies to, we have to really ensure that the biomarker testing or molecular profiling is done and that there's equity and access to this type of profiling. So from a patient experience point of view, we'll only know that type of experience once we start to better identify the patients. Now, when we do this, it's still very challenging to collect that sort of data. The reason is there's very small subgroups of patients that are spread out throughout the world, perhaps, and collecting that type of data from patients who generally are very advanced in their disease is a challenge. This, however, collecting that type of data is essential. It will take time. So the expectation isn't to get a full set of data, patient experience data all at once. It's something that we're going to see that is quite fluid and that will transfer over time, and will also vary depending on the individual patient where they are in their treatment cycle. So I think that there's a tremendous value in collecting patient experience data, particularly for the targeted therapies, because it's just adds to the dimension where we can reduce that uncertainty as to the benefit that patients are actually experiencing. But I think that the other side of the coin is really the bigger challenge. And we talked very briefly, there was just mentioned about the deliberative process. How are the expert committees in the deliberative process taking in this type of data? So it's one thing to be able to serve it up to them. It's another thing to see how they include it in their decision-making process, or do they just pay lip service to that data and focus on quality of life and overall survival benefit, and that's all.
So there's several challenges that we can think about here, especially when we get into the breakout groups in a moment. So one is in precision medicine, how do we ensure that the patient experience data we're collecting is from the patients that are within that targeted group for a precision medicine? And I think that's a challenge we're all going to have to navigate together. But then this weighting, which I think that's what you're getting at here, Barry, as well, is once you have this data coming into a HTA process, how is it used and weighted against other kinds of data? We're nearly out of the panel, but I just want to ask two more questions, if I may. And Valentina, I'm going to come to you next. We've mentioned a lot here about the HTA regulation here in Europe, and I know that the European Patients Forum has been doing a lot of work analyzing that and engaging and thinking about it. What's your perspective on this HTA regulation and how you think it may or may not help with the questions that have been coming up?
Thank you, Neil, for this question. I feel the HTA regulation offers a major opportunity for the integration of patient experience data as part of the methods. Ansgar has already anticipated some of the elements. I mean, UNETA 21 already considered patient experience data. We do hope it's going to be reality, because we know the UHTA regulation is going to be transformative on many levels. And so, of course, some HTA bodies might not be ready to uptake these methods yet, but it would be a missed opportunity if they didn't integrate patient experience data, because this regulation needs to be future-proof. It has to be there for many years to come. And we see it as a major opportunity to integrate the patient perspective at a very early stage where direct patient participation might not be always a given. One key element I'd like to bring is that maybe it's not that evident for many, but patient participation is a key barrier, which is conflict of interest. I see patient experience data as the way to overcome this issue, most probably, because it would allow to gather robust evidence from a larger patient population for a given disease area, also allow for very diverse perspectives of patient profiles. So I see a major opportunity there for these methods to be fully integrated. It's in other words, another way to bring in the patient perspective. So, but simply making it much earlier, not having to be constrained to the time frame, for example, of joint clinical assessments.
No, I think that's really important for us to keep in mind, that there are opportunities here around health equity, diversity, but also when we have small patient populations, like we've been talking about with targeted therapies, having a broad catchment geographically to capture patient experience data means that we get potentially more robust
indeed,
results.
as broad as it can be, and indeed also these data sets can be reused by in other countries by other HTA bodies, and I would say it's even a question of solidarity among patient populations in different regions and ecosystems.
Thank you, Valentina. I'm going to ask the last question to Ansgar, just to give your view here on, from your experience already, how are you seeing patient experience data being used to strengthen submissions to HTA?
Thanks, Neil. I think we heard this already in some of the responses here. We need to start early. I think we need to come to a point where patient experience data becomes the backbone of drug development. It starts really with a deeper understanding of patient needs really early on, so that in the end you can plan for impact assessment in subsequent clinical trials, but also develop instruments that adequately assess the impact of the therapy on the specific identified issue theme in the patient experience. Mm-hmm. So where I've been involved in such exercises, and they're out there for many, many years. This is not just a recent development. We certainly learned a lot about certain diseases. We used this knowledge in the engagement with the FDA when we were planning our development program. The one drug that I'm thinking about never made it to the market, but we published this experience. Well, there's a publication, there are hundreds of patients recruited through patient groups, and we published this information, specifically for disease areas or indications which are new. It's important to really also make transparent this data. We would have used it later on in the engagement with other decision makers. I think for many companies now, we have something which we would call here in my company an integrated evidence plan. It starts quite early, and it really brings together the evidence needs of the different decision makers, and patients are important decision makers. It's not just HTA, it's not just the payer, it's also clinicians, it's caregiver and patients. So to bring these things together and then to plan how to use this early is important. Otherwise, you're always too late. You use standard instruments that are not validated. You don't invest into proper data quality. So I think there's so many things that you need to start planning early in order to have patient experience to become the backbone of drug development is important. I mentioned the case of Germany, I think where, yes, I think this data is highlighted by the most important individual, that's the head of the statutory or the Joint Federal Committee of the Sickness Funds and Physicians Committee. But the key issues in the detail, I think it's often the quality. The data is collected per protocol. The quality of the data collection is insufficient. It's not like a primary endpoint. And here the data is really scarce. I think we need to take a lot more care on also how we collect the data, when we start planning for it, and how we execute around it. I think I've seen these things, they can happen, not consistently all the time, but it's worth going for this.
Oh, so that's a really good call to action for all of us to think about how we can make that happen. I want us to move on shortly, but I'd really like to thank my panel. This has been a fantastic panel here for really bringing to life some key threads that we want to explore in the next sessions that we're going to run straight after this. And I've pulled out some key themes that I've already heard here. So these are key themes around being involved for a long time, being involved early, and really building on the momentum that we're already seeing happening within HTA decision makers around wanting to get more of this data, wanting to be able to use more of this data. And we'd like to really explore today how we can make that happen from various dimensions. And I'm going to pass back to you, Levi, to take us through the next section.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you for setting the scene so nicely and for facilitating this panel discussion. Really, really great discussions. And thank you to the panelists for your rich expertise and to bringing this to life today. Lots more questions and challenges to cover. And we are here collectively with over 100 people, and I'm sure you bring a lot of experience and expertise as well. So now it's time for you to share your thoughts in a co-creation activity. So what we will do is we will break out into groups. We will be using a tool called Group Map, where we call on your experience. For that, it would be helpful if you have a computer on hand and if you can enter your email address, and then it will explain itself, and the facilitators in the room will also explain this to you. Today, we have 5 different groups, and you can choose this time which group you would like to join. So we have 3 different topics, and we have the first topics, which is about ways to accelerate the routine use of patient experience data in HTA decision-making. The second topic is looking at what kind of patient experience data, what kind of areas of impact do most align with HTA considerations. And then the third topic, we dive a little bit deeper into how patient experience data can inform precision medicine related HTA submissions. So my team will open the breakout rooms, and you can then choose which breakout room you like to join. Ideally, we have a bit of a mix over all the rooms. So if you see that one room is really full already, please join another room. And then we will be guided by the facilitators in that room. And after the discussion, we will come back plenary for a brief wrap up. So with that, I suggest we break into the groups.
Hello?
Hello, moderator. How can I help you?
I am not in any rooms.
Which one would you like to join?
I don't know.
Okay, no worries. I will move you to one of these.
Yes.
We are also competing with the parallel session, right? So there's another group on the same topic. Let's see how many people will join in the next couple of minutes. Hello. Hi, moderator.
Hi, Matt.
Hi, Carol.
How do I enter a room? Because I missed that bit.
No worries. let me know which one you would like to join. And
I was thinking of going into room 3, if that was all right.
Yeah, no problem. I push you there.
Me too, Matt. If you can put me, it's Barbara. If you can put me in 3.
Absolutely.
Hello, Matt. Also, I missed that. Could you put me into room 2, please? This is Nina from Merck KGaA.
Hi, Nina. No worries. Doing it right now. Anyone else?
Me too as well, please. I'm Andre.
Andre,
Also,
which room? Andre,
room
which
2,
room
please.
would you like to go to?
2, please.
Okay. Anyone else?
Hi. Teresa Levitch, I can't get into a room.
Which one would you like to join?
Number 1, I believe.
Okay,
If
no
it's
worries.
full. Okay, thank you.
I'll put you in group 2. The one has already is pretty full, but group 2 has the same topic.
That's fine. Thanks. Hi.
Okay, Oriana.
Yeah, thank you. How long it will be the breakout room? Because I cannot stay too much, so I don't know if I should join or not.
No, it's always good for you to join.
Okay, so
Actually feeling.
please, room 3.
Okay, I'm doing right now. Camila, can I help you?
So, Barry, what do you think? Should we work with the other group, or should we just go ahead and start? Oh, okay, perfect. Well, then I think we should get started. And so I'm just gonna quickly present myself. My name is Vincent. I work as a program manager at the Synergist, and most of my time I spent on FT3 from testing to targeted treatments, and work also on the value work stream that we have in that program. So you've heard a little bit about our work in that project, especially around the research on value drivers and HTA for technology. Let me share my screen. So today, in this breakout group, we will talk about patient experience data as key data for precision medicine. For that, we need to transform HDA substance for ID-based health technology solutions. We also have 4 questions so that we can adjust together. We'll go into more detail around this moment to ensure that we are aligned on the topic. Of course, we're not given an early introduction at the beginning of the meeting. I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into the different value dimensions that may be of interest for technology, such as biomarker testing, targeted therapy, medicine. And we are joined by Barry, one of our panelists. He'll provide expertise and experience from the patient. And Barry, I'll follow throughout talking for these slides. So, as earlier said, we have done a research study on selected HTA bodies where we assessed in their reports what kind of innovative value drivers they consider when assessing targeted therapies. For example, insight in is the Scottish Consortium, because they use patient engagement to complement the quantitative assessments that they can done. And on the right-hand side of the see of those patient engagement processes on their decision making. Between the years 2014 to 2023, they did 229 patient engagement sessions to evaluate specific drugs and technologies.
Welcome back, everyone. I think we are now closing slowly the breakout rooms, and we will gather here for a short wrap up. So I will give it a minute for everyone to get back to this room. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. The breakout rooms are now closed and everyone will get back to the plenary. I will just keep it very short, but I hope you had a great discussion in your group. At least in our group, we had a very lively discussion with also some interesting case examples. So what we will do is we will gather the learnings from the different group discussions, and we will share that with you in a follow-up email with a summary of the discussions and the slides also of this meeting, as well as the link to the recording should you wish to listen to any of the other group discussions. For you, available is already like the PAD Navigator as a tool, which we have posted in the chat, which you can use to support patient experience data study planning. And as a next step, we aim to also apply the tool further in precision oncology to better understand what is the evidence out there, what are the methods are used, but also what are the gaps and how can we develop more use cases to shape the HTA dialogues and discussions. Today, I felt we really had a very rich discussion, and I would like to thank the panelists again for their great expertise and input, and also FPI and EPF for supporting with the planning of this session. And lastly, Neil, thank you very much for great facilitation as always and for setting the scene. And thank you to all the participants for all your input and expertise. I suggest we continue the dialogue and we continue working together collaboratively to integrate patient experience data more in HTA. So if you're interested in learning more, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to share with you the work from PFMD and FT3. And of course, my colleagues from FP are also happy to stay involved. So that's it on my side. Last slide is that we have a new session coming up soon, April the 25th. So if you're interested in exploring patient-centric innovation, the Gravitate IHI project will also discuss patient engagement strategies. I hope to see you there, and I wish you a great afternoon or evening wherever you are. And thanks again, all, for your lively contributions to this session today.